Well, today we're gonna work on sphere, a basic drawing exercise. So what we're gonna do is we are going to go over a couple of the principles. So let me go ahead and sketch out this circular shape here first. And we are going to break down some of those information for our shading exercise. So once I got my basic shape in place, I will go ahead and get my shadows. Shadows should always be part of your still life. So what we have here is simply shadow, two shadows. So we have, this is called a form shadow, because this is a shadow that if I do it successfully, is going to describe the form. Then we have a cast shadow. This is a shadow that's casting on whatever surface your object is sitting on. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I am going to apply the hatching and cross-hatching technique to give it the first basic flat layers of shading. Not too light, not too dark. Pretty much just right in the middle range for me to go ahead and get started. So at this point, what I'm doing is called a technique called renderings, or some people call it modeling. And this is eventually going to give me the three-dimensional effect that most people are looking for when they do shadings. And while I'm doing this, what is going to happen right now, this is still my hatching and cross-hatching. When I'm doing this, I'm creating a transitions area. And transition area give you what we call a gradations of light to dark. And at this point, your cross-hatching really does not require any special technique other than a lot of patience. That you will be just sitting here and you render until you are satisfied with the result that you're looking for, or with the technique that you would like to have. For some people, they like the drawing very, very detailed. Then in that case, that almost no pencil mark to be seen. In that case, you would just cross-hatching millions of times until those lines completely integrated together. And for people who like their drawing to be a little bit more sketchy, then what you will be doing is you will actually emphasize those cross-hatching lines and probably do not blend them so much or too much. So I'm going to take it somewhere in between, right here. And my cast shadow, usually the darkest shadow in an object is your cast shadow. And as you notice that all the values, that means the light to darks, are gradually added on. I don't go very dark too quickly in case that I need to do any changes and modify some of my values. It's just so much easier this way. And you can see by this time, you can see the volume that started to change. Started to look three-dimensional. And I continue to change my shape of the sphere. At this time, you are going to see my dark, the transition that I'm adding on, and the shadow that I'm darkening. It's not all the way to the edge of my object. Right here, there's a tiny little bit what we call a reflected light. Even though it's called a reflected light, it's actually part of the shadow. And it should not stick out too much, but at the same time, if you leave it out, your object will not look as three-dimensional. So what I usually do is, by the time I get to my reflected light right here, when I'm looking at the object, I just lighten my pencil a little bit. That's one way to go about it. So the reflected light will just automatically show up. Another way to go about reflected light is you can go ahead and darken your cast shadow right next to it. And here you go. That's your reflected light right around this area. Then as we transit into where the light is, there will just be many different layers of transitions to finish up the sphere. And depends on the objects, the textures of your object, the material of your objects. Highlight. Now, highlight is the very, very sharp, bright light that you see sometimes in the glass objects, in people's eyes, the little reflected spot. Not every object you can easily see highlights. I have a plaster cast sphere right here, so I don't see that very easily. But if this were having a polished marble or stone, then I will be able to see the highlight there very easily. There's still a tiny little bit right there. So how do you approach highlight? It's simply that you add a little bit, very, very light value onto the light area. This is your light area. So transition gradually into the light. So I have it in there, very light. And then I will be able to use my nitty eraser to pull up the highlights. Like I say, for this object, it's not very clear. So it's very subtle right here. But if you're dealing with something that's a little bit different material, that sometimes you can see those highlights very, very clearly. So this is the basic idea, and I can sit right here for another hour and really render this to a deeper values or to a more detailed finish if I want. But by this point, what we have already accomplished is already the three-dimensional effect that you can see. So here we have it, the basic sphere shading and rendering.